travelers in the Old Testament were spirits that would travel or cross over from one plane of existence to another. In other words, the realm of the dead to the land of the living. When the Nephilim return, it will literally be an army of the evil dead, like the ultimate zombie apocalypse. Now, I believe that the Nephilim will return. I believe they're going to be the demons who possess a human army. When the Nephilim return, and we understand that the Nephilim, the spirits of the Nephilim that were destroyed in the days of Noah, in the flood, were barred entrance into the afterlife, into the netherworld, into heaven, basically condemned to roam the earth. That was the belief of the early church. That was the belief of the Jews in the time of Jesus and through all, the Old Testament period. It wasn't until Augustine in about the 5th century that that belief went away. He also basically turned the church away from believing that the Nephilim had been created at all. Ezekiel, though, saw it. And this is the thing. God bless people like L.A. Marzulli who've been, teaching this for a long time. He's right. The Nephilim are returning. Where I differ with L.A., and I've got to give him credit, because without him and his book Nephilim, which was a novel that got me down this path, I wouldn't be here right now. But I think Ezekiel 39 is a clue, but you got to understand the worldview of the prophets to understand what Ezekiel was writing. In Ezekiel 39, he's writing about the culmination of the war of Gog and Magog, and Gog was the Old Testament Antichrist figure. Okay, he is the figure that John in the book of Revelation calls the Antichrist. That is the same war that culminates with the Battle of Armageddon, which is fought for the Har Moed, God's Mount of Assembly, which is Zion, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Ezekiel says, God said that he will prepare a place in Israel for burial of Magog, the forces of Magog. The Valley of the Travelers east of the sea, refers to east of the Dead Sea, and it will block the travelers. The key is understanding that travelers in the Old Testament concept, the Old Testament world, were spirits that would travel or cross over from one plane of existence to another. In other words, the realm of the dead to the land of the living. The places where he identifies east of the Dead Sea are places that during the Exodus, the stations of the Exodus, refer to a couple of places that are named for these interactions with the spirit realm. One of the stops in the Exodus, one of the stations of the Exodus is called Ovoth, which means spirits of the dead. It's based on a root word Ov, which means medium. The medium of Endor that Saul went to see was the Ov of Endor. In fact, one of the giants killed by David's men, Ishbi, they condensed the word. Ishbi Benab is how it looks to us in English. Ishbi Ben Ov. Ishbi, son of the necromancer, son of the medium. And he was of the descendants of the Rapha, the sons of the Rephaim. The Rephaim were these spirits that the Amorites, the Canaanites, believed were the spirits of the mighty men who were of old, the ancestors of their kings. They were called in Canaanite texts, called by scholars the Rephaim texts, written about the time of the Judges, where these Rephaim were summoned through necromancy rituals to the tabernacle of El, Mount Hermon, where El, they believed, would speak words of revivification to resurrect these spirits that were called warriors of Baal. And in these texts, they're described as warriors. They mount their chariots and they travel first one day and then another. And at dawn of the third day, they arrive to be resurrected. Like Jesus, who went down and preached and proclaimed to the spirits in prison until dawn of the third day, when he arrived, except that he really was resurrected. And Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 39 says, this is where these travelers will be buried. Another one of the stops on the, in fact, the mountain where Moses was led by God to get his only view of the Holy Land, the Promised Land. Climb this mountain of the Avarim. In Hebrew, that means travelers. Mount Nebo is the mountain of the travelers. It's right there across from Jericho in the plains of Moab. And that's where this demonic army will fall. Now, I believe that the Nephilim will return. I believe they're going to be the demons who possess a human army. I think by this point the restrainer will have been removed. The church will be removed. So I pray I'm right. that we won't be here for that day, because that's the day of Armageddon. And when this demonic army comes against Jerusalem to try to claim God's Mount of Assembly, just like Lucifer in Isaiah 14, I will establish my Mount of Assembly on Mount Zaphon, raise himself above the stars, the angels of God. On that day, when God personally takes the battlefield, which Ezekiel describes, the travelers will be destroyed. And interestingly, in that verse in Ezekiel 39, he says, then the world will know I am the Holy One in Israel. That phrase is similar to one that we see in the Old Testament many times. The Holy One of Israel. Ezekiel 39, after he destroys the Antichrist army in the Battle of Armageddon that ends the war of Gog and Magog, he becomes the Holy One in Israel because he's on the battlefield. I mean, the Nephilim have always been here. If they're the spirits of those who died in the flood 6,000 years ago, they've always been with us because demons have always been with us. But on that day, they will be inhabiting the bodies of I believe, this army that comes against Israel. It will literally be an army of the evil dead, like the ultimate zombie apocalypse. God puts a stop to it. And what does it mean when Ezekiel writes in Ezekiel 39:11, it will block the travelers? The word translated block is only used one other place in the Bible. It's in Deuteronomy, the verse that talks about thou shalt not muzzle an ox when he treads out the grain. Muzzle. I'm not quite sure what that means, but if we take it in context of what Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, that we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. We will be resurrected. Maybe that's what God is saying. I will block the travelers. They're dead, and they are staying dead when the rest of us are resurrected into new glorified bodies. In Isaiah 14, Lucifer, which is really kind of a mistranslation. The Hebrew is Halel ben Shachar, which means light bringer, son of the dawn. Shachar was actually a deity in the Canaanite religion, dawn. But when Jerome translated the Bible into the Latin, the Vulgate translation, he used the Roman, or the Latin equivalent of light bringer, lux ferus, light bringer. And we English speakers have just sort of adopted that as a personal name, Lucifer. Well, again, it really just means light bringer. Baal, the storm god, who was the chief god, the king of the gods, called a son of El in the Canaanite religion, but he became the king of the gods by defeating the god of death and defeating the god of the sea. Similar to the tension in Greek mythology, by the way, between the storm god Zeus, the god of the sea, Poseidon, and the god of death, Hades. In Canaanite religion, Baal had to defeat the god of death, Mot, and the god of the sea, called Yam, in order to become the king of the gods. In the New Testament, Jesus, confronted by the Pharisees, says, he's casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, which means Baal the prince. Baal the prince of demons, I guess. Jesus also, in Revelation 2, in the letter to the church at Pergamum, says, I know where you live. It's where Satan's seat. It's where Satan dwells. Satan's seat in Pergamum. Well, that was the great altar of Zeus, who, like Baal, was a storm god. The Greeks got their religion from the Canaanites. So, Satan to Jesus, and Jesus, by the way, in replying to the Pharisees, connected Beelzebul, Baal the prince, to Satan. So Jesus identified the storm god as Satan. Isaiah 14, storm god Lucifer. So yes, Lucifer is Baal, is Satan. But Isaiah 14 says that what he was trying to do was to establish his mount of assembly in the heights of the north, the sides of the north, the uttermost north. There are a few English translations that actually get it right. This actually points back to the mountain that was sacred to the storm god Baal. Or Hadad was his proper name. Baal just means Lord, which sort of became a proper name over time. But it was also considered sacred to the storm gods of the Hurrians, called Teshub, the storm god of the Hittites, called Tarhuns, the storm god of the Greeks, called Zeus, actually fought a major battle there against the god of chaos, Typhon, at Mount Zaphon. Well, the phrase in Isaiah 14, translated sides of the north, heights of the north, uttermost north, Yarkate Zaphon, is only used 3 times in the Bible. There, Psalm 48, where Mount Zaphon was compared to Mount Zion, that mountain, Mount Zaphon, was so important to the Hebrews because it was so important to their neighbors in Canaan that Zaphon became the word for the compass point north. In every other Semitic language from the ancient Near East, the word for north is Simal. But in Hebrew, it's Zaphon. That's how important that was because of its relationship to that god. So El became the generic term for God in the Semitic world. In fact, it became so prominent that some scholars now are convinced that the name of the old god of the Sumerians, Enlil, which they used to believe was based on the Sumerian words En, which means Lord, and Lil, which means wind or ether or something. They're now believing that that's actually just a corruption of the Semitic Il-Ilu, meaning God of gods. That in other words, instead of being a Sumerian god, that Enlil, who was then replaced by Marduk in the Babylonian cosmology, which they just inherited from the Sumerians, more or less, was actually a Semitic god who was brought from the northwest, where we find Dagon, same god, different name, El, same god, different name, Kumarbi of the Hurrians and Hittites, same god, different name, Baal-Haman of the Phoenicians, same god, different name. Their points of origin all point to northern Syria or southern Turkey, not far from the mountain where Baal the storm god, was supposed to build his temple, Mount Zephon. So this old god, this El or Il-Ilu, god of gods, this old, I argue, is actually Kronos of the Greeks, Saturn of the Romans, king of the Titans, who, like the Watchers from Mount Hermon, was condemned to Tartarus. 2 Peter 2:4 says that the angels who sinned were thrust down to hell. That's how most English translations read. But the Greek word translated hell is actually Tartarau, which means Tartarus, thrust down to Tartarus. In the Greek mind, that's a different place from Hades. That's a special level of netherworld prison reserved for the old gods, the supernatural threats to the divine order.